Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury has finally aired, and with it has brought what seems to be the first female Gundam protagonist, at least in an anime. Of course there's manga like El Cool du Ciel. A few months ago when the show was first announced, I saw a few people arguing that she wasn't actually the first, and how this should not be a news story and no one should be talking about this. My first thought was that this was the first female Gundam protagonist in an anime, but with people arguing, I did want to double check myself to see if it's confirmation bias on my end or on their end. Let's just start by saying, main protagonist, main character, I am talking about the single sole perspective character. I'm not just talking about people in the cast. To start with the original Mobile Suit Gundam, Amuro is clearly the main character. There's other important female characters like Sayla, not to downplay their contributions, but they are not the main protagonist. After original Gundam, you got Zeta Gundam, and look, the man will tell you for himself.
I thought I heard a girl's name, but that kid looks like a boy. 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 That kid looks like a boy.
Apologize.
Stop it!
Hey kid, what's the idea of messing with the Titans? Camille is a perfectly good name for a guy. I'm a man and I'll prove it!
I am now realizing it will take forever to go over literally every Gundam anime, so as much as I would love to talk about literally every Gundam show, here's a list of all of them I will be skipping because the main protagonist is blatantly obvious to the point where I haven't seen anyone saying otherwise. So probably the biggest example people have been brought up to debunk the claim is that Relena Peacecraft is the main character of Gundam Wing, and yes, she drives the plot forward. However, Giran, Zabi, Char, a bunch of other characters drive the plot forward more than Amuro does in original Gundam. She is not the main perspective character. You could argue that the entire pilot Wing Boys group is the ensemble cast and there's not one clear main character among them, but it's pretty clear they were trying to make Hiro Yui the main character among even that small subgroup, and not Relena Peacecraft. Yes, she's important to the plot. Yes, she helps drive it forward. No, she is not the main protagonist who's focused on. That would be the Wing Boys, but specifically Hiro Yui. Also, it's not always the case that the main Gundam pilot is the main character. We'll get to that later. But in this case, it's clear that's what they were going for. Now, let me cover Laurent from Turn A Gundam. And people who have actually seen the show probably won't be confused, but there might be some confusion with people who have not seen the show. It is a pretty famous plot point that the main character, Laurent, cross-dresses a handful of times in the show. However, he is clearly a cis male, and this is mostly done more for tactical advantage rather than for any identity reasons. That said, I just want to note that subplot was handled, incredibly well for the time, but to answer the question, no, Turn A Gundam does not have a female protagonist. And also one other thing I want to say is that there's been this myth in the Gundam community for decades that Turn A Gundam was originally supposed to have a female protagonist, but because Sunrise or Bandai denied that idea, that Tomino just made Laurent potentially feminine, and we actually now have early concept art from Turn A Gundam, which shows that Laurent was more masculine and was never intended to be female, so I'm just leaving that myth has been debunked. And then after Turn A Gundam, we have Gundam Seed, where everyone looks feminine. But no, Yukiro Yamato is still a boy. And as far as TV anime goes, we only have one more entry left where there's any confusion. Gundam Build Fighters Try. Now, I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible for this whole video, but I was watching as Gundam Build Fighters Try was airing weekly, and I thought episode 1 was really good. I thought Fumino was a great protagonist, tying her newfound friends up to force them to watch Gundam to see why it's so cool, that is metaphorically relatable, and overall I was just really glad that this series had seemed to be keeping the sort of Gundam otaku protagonist vibes from season 1 alive. So, after episode 1, it's a pretty clear and shut case. Fumino is the main character, she is a Gundam nerd, this show's gonna be really fun like season 1. And then episode 2 makes that guy the main character, and he is for the rest of the show, and he's just kind of a martial arts guy without much more else to him. So, as much as I regret to say it, Gundam Build Fighters Try is not an example of a show with a female protagonist. Now, we've covered all the TV anime with questions, but what about OVAs and ONAs and other things not released for TV? But next we have both my favorite Christmas series and one of my favorite anime, Mobile Suit Gundam, 0080, War in the Pocket. This one's a bit more understandable than Gundam Wing, but Christina is not the main character. Yes, she pilots the main Gundam, the Gundam Alex, but that does not make her the main character, as Al is the main character. And yes, he doesn't pilot any mobile suits, but the whole story's from his perspective. He's the one with the character arc. He's the one who we always focus on. Even if you look at the pilots, Bernie is much closer to being a main character than Christina is. He is focused on a lot more than Christina, and ironically with her red hair, she's probably the closest this show has to a Char character. Now that is a bit of a reach, but it is fair to say she's, I don't want to say rival, because her and Bernie never realize that they're actually against each other, but she's basically the rival character in the show. Definitely not the main character. This is nothing against Christina. I think she is a great character and I love how she's used in the show. Everyone in the show is one of my favorite Gundam characters in like the main trio. But not the main character. So next is a really fun one to talk about. Gundam Neo Experience 0087, Green Divers. What you see on screen. So, this thing was only released in theaters in 2001 and used an experimental 3-screen setup. So what you're seeing now is the only currently remaining footage we have. So, this one's really tricky to talk about because I wasn't in Japan in 2001 to watch this, and neither were most people. So, we kinda just have this footage and a plot synopsis to go off of. And it follows 2 twins, and the older twin seems to be the main one. And this is a female protagonist, questionably, because the short also follows Amuro Ray. Asagi Briggs might be the first Gundam female protagonist, but it's really hard to say because we can't watch the footage to see if she's actually the main character or if it's Amuro Ray. Please, Sunrise, I know it's tricky with the screens, but just release this somewhere, just let us watch it. I don't even care if it's in a weird aspect ratio. Also, this design doesn't feel like a Gundam design, but I still dig it. Something about it just feels kinda nostalgic. So, next we have another OVA, Gundam Evolve, and this is essentially a series of shorts, all based on random mobile suits with no overarching plot points. So, this cannot have a main character throughout the whole thing. But we can look at individual episodes. And episode 4 is interesting, because this episode focuses on the Dreadnought Gundam, and we see it in action, but we don't see the pilot. However, we can hear the pilot talking, and we know their name, Defra Carr, who seems to be the first female Gundam protagonist. We have found it. Decades before Witch from Mercury, who knew? Now, we don't actually have the design for this character. They're really just sort of a placeholder voice who could have been filled by everyone. They don't even have much of a personality in the episode. But she exists! Here's everything about her on the Gundam Wiki. You now know everything to know about Defrakar. And again, Gundam Evolve is 15 episodes of almost sort of individual short films that don't connect. So she's not the main character in the entire thing, just in episode 4. However, in episode 9, we get Yuri Ajisa, and unless Screen Divers proves me wrong, she is the first confirmed female Gundam protagonist with a face. What an improvement. Also, I dig this early 2000s design. But not to discredit those episodes, or those characters, but can we find any female protagonists that cover the entire series, and not just an individual episode? So let's go to Gundam Seed Stargazer. Now, this one's interesting because we kinda get two main characters, Sven and Selena. I always viewed Sven as like the primary main character here, but a lot of people seem to read it as Selena. I think it's fair to say either or. I'm leaning more towards Sven though, just because he generally has the more focus, I feel like. But I cannot blame you if you would say Selene, but it's pretty close to be honest, so if you haven't seen Stargazer, even if you don't like Seed, I think you should still check out Stargazer. It's really interesting, and it's not very long either. To determine if this is the first Gundam series with a female protagonist throughout the whole thing, this one's kind of up in the air, but I'm leaning more towards no. Alright, so let's talk about the can of worms, Gundam IGLOO. There are 3 of these series. The original, Gundam IGLOO Hidden One-Year War, Gundam IGLOO Apocalypse 0079, and Gundam IGLOO 2, Gravity Front. Now, the original Gundam IGLOO feels like a series of vignettes, but they all sort of happen around the same ship with the same crew. And we have IGLOO 2, Gravity Front, which is the third IGLOO series. However, this one is completely disconnected and has 3 short stories that don't connect to each other aside from a metaphorical framing device, but none of the characters overlap. So with that out of the way, let's cover Hidden One-Year War and Apocalypse 0079. Despite jumping around a lot and generally focusing on a bunch of different characters, we see 2 primary characters show up the most. Oliver May and Montague Cadillac. It's hard to say either of these are really the main character, however, they are the ones with the most focus, and then the sequel, Apocalypse 0079, focuses on them even more. That said, I would not say Montague is the main character. She probably has the more compelling story, and she definitely has the better design. Oliver May's just kinda generic, but I do think he gets more focus in the stories overall. Next we have Gundam IGLOO 2, Gravity Front, which actually has no recurring characters from the previous 2 IGLOO series. And in the third and final episode, we are introduced to Arlene, yet another female Gundam protagonist for a single episode. So the issue here is that I can't actually mention much about her because her episode is filled with twists and turns, and all I can really say is she does some wild stuff in her mech. So we have seen that we have gotten a few female protagonists for a single episode, or in the case of Green Divers, if that is an example, Green Divers is only like 20 to 30 minutes, they say. So generally everything has only been like the length of one episode. Are there any full series with a female protagonist? We do have Gundam Twilight Axis. This was a 6-episode ONA, and Arlette is the main character throughout the entire thing. However, What this ignores is that those 6 episodes are only 3 minutes long, and the compilation film that even adds a few small scenes is only 25 minutes, so I would not say this is an example of a full series with a female protagonist throughout the entire thing, because it's not a full series, it's like episode length when combined. And finally, we have one more ONA to cover. Gundam vs. Hello Kitty. Yes, this is a real officially licensed anime, and even more surprising is that it's surprisingly really good. If you're a fan of the original Gundam, you have to go watch this. It pays homage to the final part of that series so well, and it's also just hilarious. Like, more so than just the concept of Hello Kitty vs. Gundam, it's specifically Hello Kitty meets Amuro Ray, and they have a whole back and forth, and this thing is hilarious. That said, Hello Kitty is definitely the main character of this short, but they're only like 3-minute long episodes. It's combined, it's even shorter than Twilight Axis. Is Kitty the main character of the Gundam half or the Hello Kitty half? Does she count as a Gundam protagonist? Because Amuro's there and he's like slightly less but almost the same amount of main characterness. So this is a weird one. But it exists. So now you get a know. So now we're caught up, and we have no series where a female protagonist is the main character all the way through. That's also a actual full series. And I actually started recording this months ago, and I'm only now finishing it, and since then we've actually got a prologue to Witch from Mercury. While it doesn't do much to help or hinder or whatever the arguments here, I do want to point out that, debatably, either Suletta Mercury or Elnora Samaya, her mom, is the main character in the Witch from Mercury prologue, which is another main character to add to this pile we have over here. So there you go. There's been a handful of other female Gundam protagonists for smaller projects. However, in terms of full series or TV anime, Suletta is the first. As of recording, only the Witch from Mercury prologue and G-Witch episode 1 has actually aired, and so far I'm really enjoying it. Suletta is a very different protagonist from a lot of other Gundam shows. Gundam has been going on for decades, so it's always good to get a change of pace in terms of who we're following. And I don't just mean her gender, I also mean she definitely has more of a fun vibe going for her. Her personality really isn't much like any of the other Gundam protagonists. So far, if I'd have to compare her to someone, it would be Belle from G-Reco, but even that's a little bit of a stretch. But with that, I just hope you learned something. There's a lot of corners of Gundam left unturned for a lot of people, and I hope to uncover some of those for you. I honestly didn't know anything about green divers before making this video. I honestly had to finish IGLOO to talk about this video, and I'm really glad I did, because I almost left out some major stuff in this, and who knows, maybe I did miss something. Of course, this is only about anime. I don't know very much about the Gundam manga side of things, or video games, in terms of story-based video games. If there's anything you think I missed, or anything you want to talk about, just yell at me about it. And otherwise, I don't know, go watch Gundam. There's some good Gundam.